communique to call on their peers to sensitize and mobilize as far as the various crises that is plaguing Cameroon is concerned. Talking about the crisis in the northwest and the southwest, they call on to the government of the republic to stop, to halt military solution to this crisis because it has shown its limits after some 4 years and more than 3,000 lives haven't gone unravished because of the military solution the government have decided to have as response to the crisis. Away from that, they equally talk about the socio-political upheaval that has now gone nationwide as political leaders of the opposition are tracked down. Talking about the Cameroon Renaissance movement of Professor Maurice Kamto, whose leader has now spent some 60 days in house detention, and some of his political leaders, especially that of the first vice president, the president of the women wing, and tell the government that they should assure the citizens that we are still living in the rule of law where people have freedom of their expression and can easily express their grievances wherever they deem necessary. They equally cited the cases of lawyers that are now attacked. Their profession are under attack, and they call on the government to help calm down this situation that is almost at an inflammable rate. They equally talk about a situation of health concern with the COVID-19, thanking Monseigneur Cleda, who came up at a time with the traditional medicine that helped to push and repose the ill effects of the COVID-19, and equally thank traditional rulers that did not sleep or that did not relent on their effort during the first instant when the COVID-19 was killing or claiming a lot of life, and calling on them again to stand on their feet, because it appears the second round is in now and is still claiming a lot of life. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you now, Mr. This time around with you, Mr. Carl Monica, to zoom into this message from traditional rulers. They said from the pre-colonial period, when the German came to Africa, they were dealing first with traditional rulers, citing the case of Douala Mangabe in the littoral region. What do you make of this communique from traditional rulers?
Like you rightly said, the role that the traditional rulers play in the country dates back, since from colonization. And they have brought out pertinent points and pertinent topics of discussion that we should lay out today. Like they have, expressed their unhappiness about the military role to solve the Anglophone crisis,
right?
Which is something that we've seen that it hasn't worked. It's true that we are in a stage where we have seen somehow a decrease in the number of insecurities.
But how can they say that the government have chosen military solution, knowing well fully that the government created the DDR Center, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration to help ex-fighters regain their normality? Is it that the traditional rulers are blind to these government efforts?
No, they aren't blind. The problem is, it's not about just creation. It's about making sure that all these units are functional. Like the disarmament center, we haven't had any, plausible feedback to talk about its functionality. And these traditional rulers, they identify that and they call on the government that it's not just about creation, it's to make sure that what you've set in place works and they work properly. Yet, after all this creation of all these units, we still see a lot of repressive rule. We still see a lot of, places where the government is using force to calm down the problem of the Anglophone crisis. And I think that these traditional rulers are bringing this because they have realized that it hasn't worked. And we all on this panel can see that hasn't worked, because we are still seeing cases of, how can I put it? In fact, words aren't enough to describe the inhumane activities that goes on. Where I see school children be killed, and it's sad. And these traditional rulers, they are right to say that the government needs to stop.
After you, Mr. Carl, Mr. Gabriel, the traditional rulers from West talk about the major national dialogue called by the head of state, President Paul Biya, on the September 10th, 2019, as a way to peace. And they regret that 1 year after, peace is still a very far-fetched dream. What do you make of this call?
Well, there is a possibility of calling, I repeat, of calling the major national dialogue the major national monologue.
Okay.
There is a possibility. And we can call it a charade at some point. The government did its best, but we can call it a charade at some point.
Are you saying the government was talking to itself?
Because from what we see, who are those who were invited? The constitution. I think that
the government
they came around
activists from the diaspora, and we know top Anglophone that participated to that dialogue, notably Kazina Tumi and Abogbala here in the southwest, and not to talk of others, Simon Munzu, all were convened to the major national dialogue organized by the head of state under the supervision of the Prime Minister, Chief Dr. Diongute.
You're talking about major stakeholders of the Anglophone regions. I mean, major people who have a lot of audience, but you are not talking about those who are causing the problem. How many bona fide fighters were there? How many of them? They are the people to lay down the arms. How many of them were represented? And there was some sort of a pre-configuration of the setting. That is, the people whom we wanted, I mean, a certain group of people to come on the table. And if you look at it, we cannot really talk about a successful, it is clear, the examples are clear and the realities are clear that it wasn't successful, because just after that, it's as if the situation has changed from grass to grace, meaning that there was something wrong about
are you saying
the
that
genuineness.
There has been at least a net improvement after the major national dialogue, if we are moving from grass to grace?
No, we cannot talk about a net improvement in this case. We cannot talk about a net improvement because, the killing of the lady in Moyoka came after that. I mean, that brutal killing. We cannot talk about Kumba massacre came after that. We cannot talk about people who came about a table of dialogue. We're not saying that coming around a table of dialogue.
But those idling cases maybe were just last resort. They were using it to communicate and not really as a weapon of violence as they used to do.
Are we seriously saying that the students, the children were beheaded to send a strong report? We're not supporting. It is a two-way thing. Because at the end of the day, we do not understand. Where were the teachers? If you're talking about, take a precise case like that of the Kumba massacre, where were the teachers? Why was it not a government school attacked? And on which day was it? It was on a Saturday. There are a lot of questions that come behind and creates, contentions which are still to be answered. Some have the conspirational theory that it could be a mise-en-scène. A mise-en-scène. Because let me just ask you, obviously, and I'm not implicating somebody, what is the best way in political history to neutralize your opponent? You infiltrate your opponents, and then you do something. And what is another best way to send out strong signal if you're an activist and you're not being heard? It means you cause acts which are barbaric, which would touch the integrity of human rights, especially according to the Geneva Convention. That is why I'm saying that it is not certain, it is enigmatic. Questions and answers around these activities that came after the major national dialogue.
Just 3 days after the Kumba massacre, the government reported that some 3 perpetrators have been tracked down and that the judiciary procedure was to take its course. And they say the 7 others, they have no way in front of them. They are running to a non-destination. What do you make of this government concern to clarify the people that they are taking care of their security?
It's a developing story. It's a developing story like the case of Ngabo, which in the beginning the government refused and then later on started accepting. It's a developing story.
3 military were recently tried at the military tribunal in Yaoundé as far as the Ngabo incident is concerned. And so it's still a developing story, but the government is responding according to their agenda and what they promised Cameroonians as far as sanctioning the perpetrator is concerned. Do you think that is not enough, or he has over-delayed?
I think that in all the attempts that the government can have, we're talking about we need a much more genuine dialogue. And until that dialogue comes in place, I'm afraid to say that we will continue to suffer this consequences. We are living it. We have been in it for 4 years. I mean, it has brought down us, it has handicapped us in all the aspects of life. We're talking about a genuine dialogue, something that would bring around the table the real interest. And mind you, how do you bring on the table? Let me ask a simple question.
I thought I was the one asking questions.
Let me just proceed for the moment for the discussion. How do you, if we are talking about a fighter, bring him on the table where in the ground you've chosen, and then at the end of the day, suppose that consultation is not, we don't come to a proper conclusion, or we don't agree or understand ourselves. Do we allow the fighter to go back? Or do we keep him back because he's already with us? So those are the kind of questions that they may be asking themselves, that if I'm going on the table, on the ground which is not where I think it's much more comfortable or I'm much more secured, if we do not understand ourselves, how do I go back? Will they allow me to leave from there and go to the bush and continue fighting, or and all those kind of stuff? So we are asking for a neutral ground.
The Prime Minister gave assurance that all the activists that show up for the major national dialogue will not be worried. And so, are you doubting the government?
So, can a lion assure you that he's not going to bite you and you stay in his den? That is another question. Can a lion assure you? I'm not saying that the government is a lion, but I'm saying that it's just the same kind of question. That assurance is not necessary. What I mean, an assurance it's a neutral ground. An assurance is how much they feel comfortable. We've had many other wars around us. We've had a Biafra one. But let us maybe look at how they came up, how they concerted, how they ended the crisis, you see. But if we're talking about a situation where you have to come to Yaoundé or you have to come to Douala, we impose the grounds and all those things, it may be difficult to solve. Let us try to give a listening ear, a real listening ear, because the people are suffering. We are suffering this thing.
After you, Mr. Gabriel, Mr. Carl Monica, the traditional ruler of the West region, equally cites cases of traditional rulers, their colleagues, talking about former late Chief Eso Itoy, talking about late Chief Molinga Francis Nango, all that have perished under the weight or the barbaric act of unarmed civilians, of armed civilians, or should we call separatists, that actually took them as their own bargain.
Yeah, they have a reason to say so, because especially here in the Southwest, we've had a lot of cases where we learned that traditional rulers have been massacred. Yes. And the problem is, the traditional rulers, they have to identify the role in this crisis. Okay. To bring forth solution. Now, they need to put the peoples forward. If you want to see, there have been many, let me not say conspiracy theories about how traditional rulers, join government forces and help to capture these guys and so on. But that is not what they're supposed to be doing.
Is that a bad thing to denounce their height? If they are causing terror to the people, is it a bad thing?
No, the problem is we need to look at the basis of the problem, then find solutions. We can't be treating symptoms and we see we're treating the disease. Because if they kill, the next person is going to come. You're going to have a vicious cycle of terrorism, of the community being in an unsafe environment and so on.
Are you saying that the NGOs, the women and the children, that the GGR national chairman, Mr. Fayengo Francis, that the call that he recently made to this category of people, they should not answer to it because the root cause has not been solved? Is that what you are saying?
No, not exactly that. What I'm saying is that they should be able to put much more of the energy towards the root causes. It's true that not all of these perpetrators are actually there for their common interests. We have seen in this crisis where individuals want to propagate their own agendas. Okay. So they need to be held accountable, and such actions are very important. Okay. But I'm saying that in the grand scale, people or the government and these traditional rulers, we need to be focused on solving the major issues. As he has rightly said, a real dialogue. A dialogue that can work. And this has to be in agreement where both terms come together.
And they go further, Mr. Gabriel, to cite one of their proverbs in French language. Une petite négligence peut causer de graves conséquences. Talking about how a neglected act can cause disasters. What do you make of this proverb that is cited by themselves?
I think that it is very much linked to the genesis of the crisis.
Okay.
The crisis started like a play. In fact, from the teachers' protest, lawyers' protest, being kicked, being
humiliated, battered and humiliated.
Battered, denigrated. And then subsequently came up the students of the University of Boya strike with the then Vice Chancellor,
who is now Minister of
Secondary Education. And then before you discover, a consortium came up and all of that. And gradually it took until the birth of ghost towns in the January of the subsequent year.
As they claim to have leaders of the consortium.
Of course.
The Barrister Abogbala, Dr. Fontaine Neba, and others.
Of course. So it is good that they have realized themselves and they're saying that a small negligence can also cause
disasters.
A big disaster.
Yes.
And I think that they should use that same, can I say, slang or proverb that they're using to look at the present protest of the lawyers.
Okay.
A small negligence can cause a very big disaster.
Okay.
So we throw them back for them to look at it and to try to ameliorate the conditions. We cannot also say that they are not doing anything at all. It would not be honest enough to say that they are not doing anything at all to solve the crisis. But we are just saying that it is not enough. And we are saying that it is going in a curve that may make, it may be asymptotically stable about the origin. If you continue like that, we may go to some extinction because a lot is happening in the bushes, a lot is happening in areas, the suburbs and all the rest. Those people are suffering. They are the first people who are bearing the consequences of what is happening. They are part of us. They are part of this nation. And they also have their right to life, their right to determination, to self-determination, and their fundamental rights as human beings.
After you, Mr. Gabriel, Mr. Carl, this traditional ruler goes now to what they call the second aspect to talk about the socio-political crisis, mentioning situation of the trust crisis that exists now between the people and their government. Do you foresee in the community where we live that the people do not more trust their government?
Seriously, there's a trust issue.
Okay.
We can't deny that there's a trust issue. Okay. Because it all goes to the electoral system. Because if people can't trust the electoral system, of course they won't trust the elected.
It is assumed that less than 0.2% voted for the current local administrators we have in our local council and even in the parliament. Do you uphold to those statistics?
Yeah, those statistics are real. Even the African Union came out and declared that even the presidential election, that was the least represented election in Cameroon. So you see that people aren't going out there to vote because people are questioning the electoral system. And if we don't solve these fundamental issues, we are always going to find ourselves in this mohaha. You understand? This is a fight that I think the government needs to understand and, bring up tangible solutions to face it.
And Mr. Gabriel, they talk about almost all the calls today are being tagged with tribal lines. When you call yourself a university lecturer, the region where you are, they want to know your name to start targeting you with tribal lines. When you call yourself a journalist, they want to ask from where you are. Is this how a nation should be built?
This is one of the very fundamental problems that is plaguing the nation at the moment. The question of tribalism. At some point, if you look at the genealogy of people, you will see that there is a converging point in the ancestry. Everybody came from somewhere which is common. I would like to take as reference the present chief of Bamenju, for Sokunju, being a chief who grew in the Beti land. He speaks the Beti land fluently. So that question of tribalism, it's also intertwined.
He inherited a family there.
Yes, and even inherited. So that question of tribalism is intertwined. It's directly related to the question of autochtone. Okay. That is why we really need to define what we mean by an autochtone of a region. Okay. Because if I was, if my grandfather came to Buya and died,
son of the soil,
and then my father was born here. Later on, I came. Are you going to look at autochtone from the long? The stay. the stay that I've already made in this area, in my family lineage, or you're going to look at autochtone from the very beginning. I think that the latter would be the best interpretation of autochtone.
But when Kaiser Natumi was calling for the All Anglophone Conference, he said at least those who descendant date back to 1961, talking about the year when Cameroon went into marriage, former Molanjo we call Conwiste, marriage with the East Cameroon, talking about La République.
Yes, the call of the All Anglophone Conference by Kadnatumi has been boycotted. Has been sidelined, has been thrown to the bin for a long time. But I think that it was something worthy of cogitation, the All Anglophone Conference, because he was putting what we are suggesting for a solution of the present crisis that is plaguing the community. And in the All Anglophone Conference, the major people which he spoke about, like the traditional rulers, were going to be there, and then they were going to concert themselves and come out with one voice, one resolution. But when you look at let me just take it off to go back what we're talking about. When you look at what the traditional rulers of the West region have proposed or asked those of the Southwest region to do, I think they are doing it from experience. They've experienced crisis before. What we call the Maquis in 1961. Yes. And so they are asking the chiefs to come into factor because they are the direct people, they are the direct representatives of the people. They are those who can talk to the people in their language, in their mother tongues, and can get to them and talk to them in a way that they can listen. So the role of the chief is an indispensable role. It's an asset for the solution of the crisis. So his call is one to be taken with high esteem. His call is salutary and should be emulated by all other chiefs. They should equally send out the same call so that it can instead bring, because the chiefs have been dormant from my observation. The chiefs haven't really gone out. I haven't seen chiefs talk to the people, stay in the chiefdom. We have dissertation of chiefdoms. We have dissertation of chiefs. How can you be a chief and you're in Yaoundé? How do you rule your people? How can you be a chief and being your chieftaincy or your kingship has more value in this kind of moments. In this kind of moments, if your life is being threatened, then it is time for you to say things right the way it is.
And they said that as if that was not enough, Mr. Carl, that the law on decentralization of the 19th of December 2019 actually put laws that were supposed to sanction all those who use tribal argument on social media, on radio and TV. But so many months after December the 19th, 2019, nothing has been done. Nobody has appeared before the court to be tried or to be judged on issue concerning tribalism. Is it that, as the traditional rulers are saying, that the judiciary arm of the government has been instrumentalized, has been put to contribution to suppress the people?
These people are bringing up a very pertinent point, because it's no secret that tribalism has been the center stage of our politics in this nation. We all are aware of that, but we need to build patriotism. I think that is the problem with Cameroon. There's no school of patriotism, and we can build that by putting tribalism at the forefront. So their call needs to be taken seriously, very, very serious, by the government, by people in authority, because for a country to grow, for a nation to develop, we need to stop the language of tribalism and call for a language of patriotism, inclusiveness. All Cameroonians having equal right, no matter where they come from. Now, I'm talking about tribes. For people that come from backgrounds like an English and French background, how do you want to put those people? Are they not Cameroonians?
They are Métis.
No, Métis is white and black. So the government needs to get this right. And I think that for any person in a position of authority, you should love your country. You should love your people. And this goes beyond a tribe. So that's a message that we need to send out. And I want to encourage the younger generation, wherever you find yourself, in whatever institution you find yourself, learn how to love people.
After you, Mr. Carl, Mr. Gabriel, these men, keepers of the tradition, equally talk about the freedom, the liberty law of the 1990, as it was given for the people to freely express their grievances wherever they deem necessary. But today it has been compounded, is what is called the terrorism law of 2014, where When 5 people are seen on the streets, they can be booked, they can be tracked down and brought to jail because it's assumed that they are a group of people that can orchestrate public disorder. What do you make of this increasing violation on freedom of liberty as more and more people are stopped from manifesting and sharing their grievances on the public place?
The government is right in trying to ensure national security, in trying to ensure avoid collateral damage or civilian casualties in manifestations. That is why you are called to seek for permission before going down for them. But there is a bone of contention. Okay. There is something that raises another question. When people want to express their grievances, are they actually given? We have the impression that there is an inclination as to who is given the opportunity to manifest and
mostly
who is not given.
Closer to the Yaoundé administration.
I may say so, because when it comes to manifestations to support the ruling party, manifestations to support the present president, manifestations and all the public and so on, we have the impression that they are quickly granted that permission.
Sometimes they go without the permission.
Sometimes even without the permission, and at the end of the day, they can have maybe some refreshment at the end of the day for the same manifestations or so. But when it comes to manifestations from those who have, a high skilled level of indignation in them, we have the impression that it has not been granted. And if that is the case, then it is not fair. We need to apply jurisprudence. What holds for one holds for all. That is the situation. So if you permit others to manifest in support of the party and system, you should also permit those who are of the opposition party to strive for equality and to bring in real democracy, if they are saying that we have democracy in this nation.
And see with you, they equally talk about regional equality, talking about the opportunity that every region should have towards having their children, son and daughter, pass public exams. They suggest to the head of state to put forward a 10% equal right for every region, representative of every region, to pass a concours. Do you think all the 10 regions of Cameroon can be given the same chances to a public competitive examination into the public service?
I think that concerning that, the government is already working. It is good to say it. I think that concerning regional balance, in terms of public examinations, they are doing something. So it is instead of our interest to consult the government or those in the major offices for what they've documented down as rules for regional balance, because when you're talking about concourse in Cameroon, there is a quota.
Yeah, the quota as it stands is still the one dated of Ijo's administration that is being administered by the Minister of Public Service and Administrative Reforms. Nothing as far as the Bias administration is concerned, where, for example, the Southwest region has 11.6%. A region like Center South, they are around 17 and 16. So when you take the proposal from the traditional rulers from the West that are seeking for a 10% for all the region, it becomes very clear that population dividends and other parameters that are put to contribution in order to share this quota might fade away. Do you see a possibility, Mr. Carmonica, that this 10% suggestion should be considered by the head of state, Mr. Paul Biya?
I see a very big possibility, because I think this calls in for meritocracy.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to come to that point where we give people by merit. It's true that we need to put it in consideration, regional balance, but I think the 10% for each region will bring in play, hard work, because every son or daughter from every region will know that if I don't work hard, I'm not going to be there.
But there was a time in this country where a graduate from the northern part of the country, Maroua, Garoua, and Ngaoundere, were accepted in ENAM, in competitive ENAM, with what we call GCO level, while their counterpart of the southern parts of the country, center, east, south, west, and northwest, were only allowed with A level. Do you think, giving 10%, shall we not have situation that we will lack candidates from other parts of the country?
No, I don't think so, because I think that when people realize that this is the rule. They're going to have to work hard to meet up to the standard. Does it mean that we want to encourage laziness?
Mr. Gabriel, I will be back to you, Mr. Carl. Do you mean we have the same level of urbanization and learning facilities in all these regions? Take a region, for example, like the Eastern region. If you give such a quota to the East region, are you sure they are going to meet up with the expectation?
That is a good question. Thank you for that, because when we're talking about regional balance, let's not accept or ask for things which would, downplay on what is essential.
Okay.
You have to get into whatsoever or achieve whatsoever you are searching for by merit. Okay. But because of some other parameters which may not have been taken into consideration, parameters pertaining to the geographical region, maybe the instability in the region, the political climate, and all other the demographic conditions, this is what prompts the government or us to ask for regional balance. But then again, shall we advocate for much more for regional balance to the detriment of meritocracy? That is the question. I say no. The 10% is okay. The 10% is okay, and going further than that, it's another way of encouraging laziness. It's another way of, fighting or bringing down.
How do we activate leadership if we want to say all the regions have the same level of understanding, the same equality, the same chances to public concourse? How do we activate leadership of regions that we know that are delayed in terms of urbanization?
That's a difficult question to
Yes, Mr. Carl.
No, as you said, I'm going to try this because it's true that we are not going to know how much a region can offer until they are given the terms. I will not victimize any region that they are not as intelligent as other ones.
No, but there are some regions that their urbanization rate is very low. Take region, for example, like the Eastern region. Cutting from Garua Bulai throughout the entire East region, you have the impression that we are backward in the 60s. What do you make of their development portfolio that has been hijacked by administrative pundits in very closer to the Yaoundé administration in Yaoundé?
No, Mr. Cyril, these guys have the elites of their place. They have the elites of the region, and they're in government. These people are in government. So I think that this is the responsibility of the elite of that region to tell the government that we need urbanization. Because if you like it or not, they eat part of the national cake. So the elites need to be more responsible to their citizens, to their regions, and it goes back to the point of patriotism. If you are patriotic, you're going to want development for your region. So that is the problem. Patriotism.
And this message from a viewer in Limbe, our current viewer, keep sending your messages. Mr. Lensley, I think our government is like a government of the 1960s, brought to govern in the 20th century, should we say 21st century, Mr. Lensley. They keep forming ministries and other bodies here and there. Leaders in Cameroon don't carry the burden of the citizen. They carry their personal stomach. Do you agree with Lindsay, who actually thinks that leaders are more preoccupied by their stomach than the citizen they are being charged to govern?
That would be an overstatement.
Okay.
That would be an overstatement. I think that saying that they are not doing enough, it's going to be better than saying that they are not doing anything. Okay. Let's try to be very elegant in our vocabulary.
You said here that a hungry stomach cannot be preaching peace. How do you expect people to be polite in their words?
Yes, but that does not equally impose the truism of the statement. Yes, if they are saying it from other conditions, that does not impose a truism. But what we are saying is the way you communicate can either, be an asset to the solution, or it's going to be a detriment to the solution. Okay. So telling somebody who is trying to do one or two things that he's doing nothing may contribute to much more negative consequences of the situation. Tell him you've done this, but we are expecting more, and you have. The ratio is 4 on 5, is 2 on 5. I can rate my own ratio.
Going by solution, traditional rulers of the Western region propose to the government that they need to be legitimate. What do they mean?
Proposing to the government?
They propose that they need a legitimate recognition of by opposition parties.
Sorry, I don't get the question.
How do political parties of the opposition recognize the government that they are legitimate?
Okay, that is another very difficult question too, because the legitimacy of the government in terms of elections, if we go back to it, what we are saying is it is true that we have many theories. Can I say conspiracy theories?
They are not conspiracy, evidence-based theories that has shown that the government is not using regular electoral processes to win election in Cameroon. That cannot be an overstatement.
But
the Cameroon Renaissance movement, headed by Professor Maurice Kamto, at the aftermath of the 2018 race to Etudi, denounced what they called in that time the electoral hold-up and called on the government of the Republic to revise the electoral code, which is the instrument that is being used in Cameroon and govern electoral processes in the nation. It's the same thing that the traditional rulers from the West are calling on the government to seek recognition from political parties of the opposition because they are their opponent in the harem of governance.
There's a difference between seeking or recognition by the government of the opposition parties and whether the opposition party are actually seeing the government legitimate in their positions because they've won by electoral votes. I would go the two ways. Okay. I'll start the first one saying that let's stop a whole rosary of contentions of maybe irregularities in the system. I think that the people I am shooting on is the opposition political parties because they do know what they are supposed to do. We are having a situation where most political opponents it's maybe a possibility for their own personal aggrandizement or for their own private motives or so. Because if you look at the scenario of 1990, where we had, in quotes, a winning of the elections by the SDF, I want to say that they were not honest enough by saying that the SDF won the election. It was a coalition of many opponent parties. Let's admit, the first step to success is admitting whether people are strong or not. Those people, I mean, when we talk about the ruling party for now, as a single entity, as a party, they're strong. And what is the way to bring them down? I don't think that the opposition parties, going single-handedly now can win. So it is of their interest, if they have the interest of the nation at heart, to come together for a common cause like what happened before in 1990, but we did not find that. How many voting offices are there? We're talking about 25,000 voting offices. Which political or politician party alone as a party can cover all of those places? There is a big danger in this issue of elections. People always see winning elections as winning in the major towns, in the capital, in the economic capital in Yaoundé. No, we are winning elections in the suburbs. And reaching the suburbs by each party would be difficult as a noun per my political studies. But when we come about a coalition between this party, we have more vigilance. How many of those offices where they vote are void of political representatives? How many?
And Mr. Gabriel, pundits of closer to the opposition will respond to you by asking you, where in the world have you seen the ruling system, the incumbent, calling on the political party of the opposition to join themselves and fight them? Where, if not of a system that is already rigged before election?
Except for my ignorance, I did not see the ruling party calling on the opposition. We
have had pundits of the CPTM come on panel and said people of the opposition should go and unite themselves to fight them.
I think that the people who came on the table to say such a statement were neutralists. Okay. Were people who are studying the political situation from the 2 points and are making comments. One of the very few people I know in such a situation is Elimbi Lobel that I usually see on the TV panels. And the others have political inclinations in their core. But what I'm saying is that let the all the opposition parties come together and join their resources, join their forces for a common interest. Until they do that, we are not sure that ascending the power will be different from what we're...
It's noted, Mr. Gabriel. It's noted. After you, Mr. Carl, the traditional rulers of the West equally talk about another, but this time around, inclusive dialogue. What do they put into an inclusive dialogue? Knowing well fully and having cited beforehand that the head of state called on the major national dialogue whose resolutions are now being implemented after the major national dialogue.
I think the inclusion here is bringing the people in the terrain. who are the battleground.
Who are those people?
These, we know them. The government know them. The government can't deny that they don't know these
But the government has released so many Anglophone detainees that were before now in prison.
We can't deny that the diaspora is playing a lot of role when it comes to the propagation of this crisis. So we have major stakeholders outside of the country, the diaspora. There's the Anglophone diaspora. So when we talk of inclusion, we mean all of these people, people in the country, people outside of the country, and even the opposition party. Because I think this is where we need to bring unity in the country.
And they equally talk about the institutionalization of a peaceful transition, a more dynamic transition at the helm of our institution. Do you see traditional rulers afraid to talk about the president of the republic looking for, a peaceful change?
Yes, there has been a lot of theory concerning a tentative of grey in terms of the presidential powers, the chair in this country. But in their call, if we're talking about a peaceful transition, we're talking about a peaceful election.
Okay.
So it comes prior to that. We're talking about peaceful elections. And so.
But why do they think that they need another institution? Elekam is already taking care of that.
No, the difficulty with Elekam is the inclination that we think that Elekam has. But we're not seeing how neutral it could be, because when we talk about the director of Elekam has been appointed, right?
Right.
He's been appointed by the head of state. The head of state is of a political party. And for obviously, what do you think? That a director will, if he has to sideline, if he has to fall on the side, which side are you talking about? We are not incriminating or saying that he is working for the
We
political
have seen
party
cases in the Gambia where the chief judge of the Constitutional Council declared election against a very president who nominated him. So it's a possibility on the African land that somebody who has been nominated through this rule in disfavor of his leader or his boss.
I like the word "it's a possibility" in Africa. But let's come back to the subset in Cameroon. Is it a possibility? And the other way we can see it as a possibility is that we go down the memory lane of our the political history. When you go down, we don't think that it's a possibility here because of the indebtedness of those who have been nominated, because of, the fractional, the proportion of representative of one party in a system that is taking care of a fair and clean elections for everybody. So we don't see it for now as a possibility, except we are calling for international bodies, not like the one of 2018, who we saw seven ghosts. We do not understand where they came from coming to play the role of a watchman.
You also put to tax the result of the 2018 elections.
Of course. It was flabbergasted. How can you? We are talking about seven fake
representative
people.
Or Transparency International
In a nation like this, I think that
projected in the state media.
So that can be something to take home as a resolution by the government. I think that they should make sure that it doesn't repeat itself again, because that is an assassination of the integrity of the nation. I think that it is going to downplay on the integrity of this nation if such a thing should ever come up again.
After you, Mr. Carl Monica, we are moving out of the 6-page document produced by traditional ruler from the West, and we cannot forget about this emphasis on the implementation of the law on decentralization, talking about the institutionalization of their traditional chieftaincy. They want at the same level like council are being built and managed, that the traditional chiefdom should equally have a level of institutionalization that can be respected just like local council. Do you see the government of Yaoundé responding favorable to this call?
Now, the very birth of this country was with the traditional rulers.
Right.
And I think that the government admonishes that, because there are many instances where we see that the government call for traditional rulers, even in the case of the Anglophone crisis, for them to come in to the ground, to step in. So I think that I want to give the government a good conscience to think over these and maybe go back to history and learn the role and the functions that traditional rulers had for the growth of this country and bring these people in. They deserve to be in.
Still with you, Mr. Carmonica, it's not premature to call on the government to shift the financing to decentralized region or to local decentralized region from 15% to 30% just 1 year after the law on decentralization was arrived. They are asking the government to give more finances to the local council so that they can easily manage their affairs, moving from 15% that is the state now to 30% as their proposal. Do you see the government yielding to that?
Yeah, the government for now, I think that we yield. The government will have to yield because decentralization is still questionable in this country. There's a very big mark of interrogation when it comes to decentralization. But I think that what the traditional rulers are proposing is more practical. It will please the people more because we won't be satisfied with the pseudo decentralization. It's better that we know that the locals are having this percentage and they're doing this because the imminent or the present decentralization mechanism isn't working.
Will the 30% enable local council to employ graduates from their village to take care of their water pump, electricity on the streets, and many more local development issues?
I think so. I think that the 30% will do that. Because we're talking about, what are we talking about? 30% of trained local administrators. That's what their projection. But if we were looking at the proportion that is assigned to the local community, we may play that it should maybe go to up to 50%.
No, 30% of resources that is being shipped from Yaoundé, that includes finance, especially finance?
No, I don't think so. How can we talk about decentralization? When we talk about handling a state, we're talking about handling the states at their local levels. Those are the most important parts. We're talking about the council. We're talking about constructions in the cities and all the right. So if we're talking about sending just 30%, and we have 70%,
as of now, it's just 15%. That is
70% state. Staying at the national
central
house,
at the
central house.
Oh, yes.
The question is, to what extent does this solve the problem? We think that it's just a tickle solution to the problem. It's not enough. Something should be done about the percentage that is being sent down for the local communities, because they have already created NASLA, the National School of Local Administrators here in Boya. And we'd hope that those from the local communities will be trained properly. And so the question of proper budget management, it's hopeful. I mean, it's a hopeful vision for us.
Talking about budget, Mr. Carmonica, on the aspect of health, traditional rulers talk about following up and punishing defaulters that will have sidelined COVID-19 funding. Do you think that the theory on COVID-19 funding by the Minister of Public Health, Manuda Malachi, do you think he embezzles COVID-19 money?
Now that's a tough question on set. Now, I'm not a judge. Okay. I'm just an analyst, yeah. But that's true that there are a lot of theorems with respect to funding for COVID-19 and how much it's actually been given to the people at the forefront, the first responders. So I think that it's normal for people to raise questions because we still see facilities that are not equipped to handle cases of this impending birth. So these people have the right to raise up their questions, and I think that the government should give appropriate answers and by proving to them that the money was properly used. And that can only be seen if they show us equipped hospitals, if they show us first responders that have everything that they need to fight against this pandemic.
And they equally talk about the government reducing their standard of living. Does the government live like a bourgeoisie amongst the poor? Mr. Gabriel.
The government reducing the standard of living of the people
or their own standard of living. The Frenchman will say the gouvernement roule carrosse.
No, if we're talking about reducing the standard of living of the government, I think that it is going to be something that would have a difficult solution to find because of the present system in which we're finding ourselves. We're in a country where People think that everybody wants to be in the government. Everybody wants to have something, somewhere to sit, in fact, a government position. So with that kind of a mentality, how do you talk about reduction of governments have just a lot of facilities around them, and that is even the reason why there's a lot of politicization rather than economic progresses in our nation. So the call to reduce their standards of living may be something which would be quickly treated as a file to be thrown in the dustbin as per what I see by the government officials, but I think that it doesn't equally on the other side.
Do you think it will bother some government officials seeing advocates for their low standard, that they should drop their standard of living?
That's what I'm saying, that the question of dropping their standards of living, it's something that may cause much more irregularities as a response from the government. Okay. So that is also another thing that we don't know how it's going to, how they are going to appreciate it. But I can say from a little bit of forecast analysis that they will not appreciate that. So let's go to the real problems. What is the problem? Let's point the problems and resort to it.
The traditional rulers think that local businesses should be given some support, some financial support to boost their activities during this COVID-19 challenge.
Very, very true. Very, very true. The lockdowns, the inaccessibility of persons to the marketplaces and so on have affected the local businessman. And I think that like any other normal government, the government should do that. The government should help local businesses. The government should help the locals.
But the Minister of Youth Affairs and Civic Education was recently in various regions coughing out from 1 million to 3, some 6, to what he called the government youth triennial plan. And some of your friends definitely will have benefited that here in Buea. Don't you think that is the government response to support local activities, notably businessmen?
I think that it's the government's duty to support local businesses, because
it's not related to COVID-19 challenges.
COVID-19 comes in play to just surmount that, to just add. But normally every government should support the local businessman, because the government is for the people, by the people. You see, people are the center stage of the government, and every reasonable government, patriotic government, should care about the people. So even putting COVID-19 aside, the government should support the local business people.
Yeah, Mr. Gabriel, yes, in Nigeria, for example, the government has have what they have put in place since years, the National Youth Council that actually facilitate the transition. And this year, the minister, according to a recent outing of the Minister of Youth Affairs in Nigeria, they said they are going to allow young people to start businesses without registration as a means to allow them to try their way into employability. Do you think that is the kind of measure the government can put in place in Cameroon to facilitate the inclusion and the growth of these micro enterprises?
The government has already had the similar activities here. Okay. We have a National Youth Council here. Okay. We have, maybe they are not pronounced because a lot of activities which could cause us to, which will make them to gain visibility has not been seen or made. But they have done something on National Youth Council. They have done something in their small and medium-sized enterprises. They are doing some 1 or 2 efforts. But the government does not have as only ambition empowering the youths in the sector of entrepreneurship. And even if they do so, they cannot, do it for everybody. So I think that we are calling only on the government to empower these young entrepreneurs. That is not correct. We need to call on everybody. Everybody has a role to empower entrepreneurship. We have big business people. They could be a support system to also empower the young. We have the people themselves. I think that there is a strong problem. It is not just about empowering them to create businesses or whatever. It is the response of the masses or the customers to what they are doing. We have a problem of patronization of products in this nation. How many people will enter somewhere and see something manufactured in Cameroon and the one manufactured in France or I don't know whatever, any other country, and decide to consume that of Cameroon? For example, I know people who do plantain flour in the faculty Faculty of Agriculture, University of Buea. I know those who are doing the fabrication of shoes. Now, because they are not in a very large-scale industry or large agricultural cultivation, for those in agriculture, their prices seems to be expensive, and that is just their little efforts to try to break even in their business. So it only gets better with much more subsidization. It only gets better with patronization of products that I know that let me consume Cameroon, because consuming Cameroon makes me greater. It makes a circulation of money, what we call the Indian cobweb method. So it is not only the government which should be called to order in terms of, called for much more progress in terms of boosting or empowering the youths. The major stakeholders, the big businessmen, the lecturers, everybody in his capacity, and every citizen in his own position is also called to that same mission.
And after you, Mr. Gabriel, we take our second topic today and the last, where we are just going to give some small